Rain pelted the windshield as Maya drove down the long, winding road out of city, her palms clenched tightly on the steering wheel, knuckles white. The wipers slashed on the water, making a rhythmic thump that echoed the pounding in her chest. It wasn't simply the storm out of doors that made her tremble. It was the hurricane she had simply walked far away from. Hours in advance, she had stood inside the living room of the simplest domestic she had ever acknowledged, surrounded by using individuals who had called themselves her family, as they dismantled her whole experience of self in a matter of minutes. Maya had always acknowledged something become special. She couldn't pinpoint it as a child, now not exactly, only a lingering feeling that she didn't quite belong. Her mother and father, Eleanor and Richard, have been remote in methods that couldn't be defined away by way of their careers or personalities. Her brother, Adam, years her junior, constantly appeared to carry a quiet resentment in the direction of her, a passive disinterest that slowly morphed into coldness as they grew older. At first, Maya thought it was her imagination, or maybe some things she had executed incorrect. She tried more difficult, always attempting more difficult. Higher grades, cleanser room, fewer questions. However, no matter how ideal she tried to be, she constantly felt like a guest in her own house. Cherished, possibly, however most effective as a responsibility. The fact unraveled slowly, a passing remark from a neighbor, an extraordinary appearance from a relative at her own family collecting, documents she stumbled throughout even as cleaning the attic one summer season. It was a diminished envelope addressed to Eleanor, postmarked almost 30 years in the past, with a one-of-a-kind call within the go-back cope with. Inside changed into a letter, full of warm temperature and remorse, from a lady named Layla, who mentioned a toddler she had to surrender, and the way she was hoping the little woman turned into thriving. Maya had stared at that letter for what felt like hours, unable to process the load of what it meant. While she subsequently faced her dad and mom, she didn't expect denial. She'd become too vintage for fairy stories. However, she hadn't anticipated rage either. Eleanor's face went faded as snow, even as Richard surely stared at her, jaw locked. It became Adam who stated it out loud. So that you eventually figured it out, took you lengthy enough. The confession came with an avalanche of bitterness. Sure, she turned into followed. No, they had never deliberate to inform her. She need to be grateful, they said, that they had taken her in, given her a life she wouldn't have had otherwise. Eleanor's voice cracked as she said, "You're not honestly ours. You by no means have been. You have been a person else's mistake." The one's words gutted her more than she idea phrases ever may want to. The next hour changed into a blur. Voices raised, doors slammed, accusations hurled like daggers. Maya tried to invite why they had followed her if they could never in reality love her. Why fake for such a lot of years? Richard snapped that it were Eleanor's idea, a project, a test of types, to look if she should raise a person no longer her own. However, it didn't paintings, he said with a finality that dispatched chills down my spine. You constantly felt like a stranger. It wasn't simply the revelation that broke her. It turned into the way they acted, as though she became the one who had executed something wrong. Adam scoffed at her tears, instructed her she had usually gotten within the way, that the whole lot would have been higher if she had never come into their lives. Eleanor failed to shield her. She just became away, as if she'd been ready years for Maya to depart, so she did. She packed a duffel bag, grabbed her vehicle keys, and drove through the typhoon, tears blending with rain, heart fractured in ways she didn't recognize should exist. She wasn't driving towards something specifically. She didn't have a destination. She simply had to get away the residence that changed into now not her domestic. 3 days later, she located herself in a small coastal city miles away, in which the air smelled like salt and the ocean thundered in opposition to the rocks below. She rented a modest room above a bookstore owned by an old couple who requested no questions. The quiet suited her. For the primary time in years, she wasn't seeking to show anything, but silence has a manner of magnifying pain. At night time, she could lie wakeful, observing the ceiling, replaying every second of her existence via this new lens. Her first birthday turned into that actual joy on Eleanor's face or pressured affection. The manner Adam used to keep away from keeping her hand while crossing the street. the absence of circle of relatives' pics that protected her before the age of 2. It all made experience now in the most heartbreaking manner. She considered achieving out to Leela. She nevertheless had the letter. She had read it 100 instances, memorized every loop and curve of the handwriting, every gentle phrase. The woman who had birthed her appeared to hold genuine regret, now not for giving Maya away, however, for not knowing where she ended up. There was no bitterness inside the letter, simplest wish. It took her greater weeks to jot down returned. She didn't realize if the address turned into nonetheless legitimate, didn't recognize if Leela would want to pay attention from her, but she had to attempt. Her word became easy, cautious, and laced with hesitation. I believe you could have written a letter to my adoptive mom almost 30 years in the past. My name is Maya. I assume I is probably your daughter. 3 days later, she received a name. The voice on the other give up became shaking, slightly conserving again sobs. Maya, the woman breathed. I've waited so long for this. Leela lived in a quiet suburb in Oregon, not a ways from in which Maya had ended up. They arranged to fulfill at a park midway among them. Maya arrived early, coronary heart pounding so loudly she conceived it would burst via her chest. Whilst Leela walked up the path, clutching a picture in her hand, Maya knew right away. The resemblance was plain. They'd the same eyes, deep brown, huge with unspoken memories. Leela wept overtly as she embraced her. Maya didn't cry, no longer but, she just let herself be held. Over the weeks that followed, Maya started to piece together her personal history. Leela had been only 19 while she had Maya. Her dad and mom had forced her to provide the baby up, satisfied that a baby might destroy her future. She had spent years searching, writing letters that had been by no means replied, praying that Maya changed into secure in Leela's domestic. Maya saw images of those who appeared like her, cousins, aunts, uncles. She met them slowly, one by one, and with every assembly, a brand new part of her heart healed. They didn't see her as an outsider. They saw her as a missing piece in the end lower back. There was no resentment, no suspicion, simply pleasure, but it wasn't smooth to permit pass of the past. Some days, Maya could still think about Alina and Richard, about Adam, and surprise if any a part of them overlooked her. However, then, she could recall the way Alina had checked out her, no longer like a daughter, but a burden. She could recollect Richard's bloodless words, Adam's disdain. What they had given her wasn't circle of relatives. It changed into performance. What she had now, however fragile, felt real. One wet nighttime, similar to the only she had fled in, Maya stood through the window of Leela's domestic, looking droplets slide down the glass. Leela came up beside her, wrapping a heat shawl round her shoulders. You don't have to look lower back, Leela said softly. You have got a destiny right here, in case you need it. Maya didn't answer proper away. She watched a couple of sparrows dancing through the moist branches of a tree. For the primary time in her existence, she felt something surprising bloom in her chest. Belonging, perhaps own family wasn't about blood or paperwork or guarantees that weren't stored. Maybe it become about who stood by means of you while the fact got here out. Who still chose you while all people else walked away. Maya turned from the window and smiled on the woman who had given her lifestyles, no longer simply biologically, but now emotionally, spiritually. She didn't have all the answers. She didn't recognize what might come next. But she knew one issue with certainty. She wasn't on my own anymore, and that become enough. Time didn't heal all wounds, however it dulled them. Months handed considering Maya had observed Leela, and even as the sting of rejection nonetheless lingered, it no longer dictated the rhythm of her days. She had moved right into a small rental a few blocks from Leela's domestic, a quiet space with tall windows and simply sufficient room for her artwork resources, her books, and her slowly developing collection of secondhand furniture. Leela visited often, constantly bringing some heat dish wrapped in foil and too many questions on Maya's day, her sleep, her feelings. At first, Maya resisted the eye. She wasn't used to being checked on. However, in the end, she started out to look forward to the one's knocks at the door. Leela by no means pried into the past, never spoke sick of Alina or Richard. That silence, that grace, made Maya accept as true with her more. A few nights, whilst the wind howled out of doors and the condo felt too big, she might call Leela simply to speak. They would sit on the smartphone for hours, now and again saying not anything, just sharing the equal moment from exceptional couches, and then got here the letter. It arrived in a nondescript envelope without a go-back cope with. Maya diagnosed the handwriting straight away, Eleanor's stiff, specific script. Her stomach grew to become as she slid her finger under the seal. The letter changed into short. Maya, we heard you've been in contact with your biological mother. I'm hoping you've found whatever its miles you had been looking for. Simply understand that we did our satisfactory. Anything alternatives we made have been ours to stay with. I count on you've made yours. This may be our last communication. Eleanor, there was no warmth, no affection. Just a chilly, tight-lipped acknowledgement that Maya had stepped out of line, as though her search for identity had by some means betrayed them. She stared on the letter for a long term, then folded it up and positioned it in a drawer she could later lock and in no way open once more. That night time, she instructed Layla about it. The older lady sighed, going for walks a hand through her salt and pepper curls. A few human beings can best love in conditions, she said, and whilst you forestall assembly the one's situations, they prevent seeing you. Maya nodded. She desired to sense not anything. However, she didn't. She felt grief, no longer just for what have been, however, for what could in no way be. Even though she had never in reality felt time-honored with the aid of Eleanor and Richard, some part of her had nevertheless held onto the idea of reconciliation. A better finishing. But that door was close now. Rather than living on it, she centered on constructing something new. She started operating at a local arts center, teaching portrait classes to youngsters and hosting weekend workshops for adults. The first time someone referred to as her Passover Maya, she almost cried. No longer as it reminded her of college or shape, but because it felt like she had eventually stepped into herself, her own name, her very own area. One afternoon, after a category complete of chatty fourth graders blanketed in acrylic paint, a female approached her whilst wiping her fingers on a towel. She appeared vaguely acquainted. Sharp eyes, ash blonde hair in a twist, sporting a long camel coat. Maya's breath stuck. It turned into Claire, Richard's sister, her aunt. They hadn't spoken in years, perhaps no longer because Maya became 16. Claire had always been the least adversarial many of the own family, but she in no way intervened either. Maya braced herself. I heard you were here, Claire said quietly. I wasn't certain if I should come. Maya raised her eyebrows. Yet here you are, Claire smiled faintly, acknowledging the irony. I'm now not here to guard them, she stated quick. I desired to say I'm sorry for how matters passed off. Maya stared at her, uncertain a way to reply. Sorry for what? For status by using? For looking her be forged out like a stranger? I constantly thought what they did become wrong, Claire persisted, voice trembling now. However, I stayed out of it due to the fact it wasn't my region. I see now that silence has a price. Maya's throat tightened, but she nodded. Yeah, it does. Claire surpassed her a small envelope. That is for you, out of your grandmother, Richard's mom. She passed some months ago. She left this in her will, told me to make sure you bought it. Maya blinked. She remembered me. Claire's eyes softened. She in no way forgot you. After Claire left, Maya sat in her vehicle for a long term before opening the envelope. Interior become a sensitive gold chain with a locket. Inner, a picture of Maya at age 3, beaming and included in birthday cake. On the opposite facet, a tiny handwritten note. You may usually be mine, regardless of what all and sundry says. Love, Grandma Ruth. It undid her. Sitting there in the automobile, Maya wept for a girl who had loved her quietly, even when the rest of the family grew to become away. She wore that locket each day after. Time endured to stretch forward. The past in no way absolutely disappeared. It whispered from old drawers, echoed in goals, slipped into conversations while she least predicted it. However, it didn't haunt her the manner it used to. She met a person, a mild, constant woman named Harper, who ran a flower shop a few blocks down from the humanities middle. They met when Harper delivered bouquets to one among Maya's workshops. Their conversations commenced over daisies and dandelions and grew into lengthy walks via the bay, quiet dinners, sleepy mornings with coffee and no rush. One nighttime, Maya instructed Harper everything: the adoption, the disownment, Leela, the letter, the grief. She expected a shift in the air, a hesitation. But Harper really squeezed her hand and said, You didn't lose your own family, you simply hadn't discovered them yet. It had become easier after that to trust that love didn't must be earned or proven, it could actually be given and received. Leela cried when Maya instructed her about Harper. "I need to fulfill her," she said, wiping her eyes with a serviette. "Yule," Maya promised. Years passed. Maya and Harper married in a small ceremony overlooking the sea. Leela walked her down the aisle. Maya didn't wear white, she wore tender blue, the shade of calm seas and second chances. On the reception, someone requested who the girl beside her was. Maya didn't hesitate. "My mom," she said. Later that night time, Maya stood at the balcony of the tiny seaside lodge in which they were staying. Harper wrapped her palms around her from in the back of, resting her chin on Maya's shoulder. Below them, waves crashed in opposition to the rocks. In the distance, a person lit a lantern and allowed it go with the flow into the sky. My concept of that little girl who used to stare on the ceiling, thinking why she didn't sense desired. She notion of the lady who had once pushed right into a hurricane with nothing but a duffel bag and a breaking coronary heart. And she or he thought of who she become now, not someone waiting to be chosen, but someone who had selected herself. For the primary time in her existence, she felt whole, and that turned into everything. The seasons shifted, gradual and smooth, the manner they constantly do, while you're no longer counting days, however virtually living them. Maya's global had grown into something she once idea impossible, now not grand, no longer loud, however complete. Complete of color, full of affection, complete of peace. The ache hadn't disappeared, but it had softened, grow to be a part of her cloth as opposed to the entire existence with Harper changed into a quiet pleasure. They spent weekends tending to their little lawn, arguing over herbs versus vegetation, sipping coffee barefoot at the porch as the arena stirred unsleeping. Maya had by no means believed in for all time until she met Harper, now not due to the fact she didn't want it, but due to the fact she had learned that even the people who were purported to stay could pick out to stroll away. But Harper stayed, through the coolest, the complex, the in-between. Leela, too, had become a permanent fixture, her laughter echoing in their home. Her memories portray pics of Maya's long-lost historical past. There were birthdays now packed with faces that seemed like hers, hugs that didn't feel like duties, and presents wrapped no longer in paper but in meaning. A hand-knit scarf, a early life image album restored from what little Leela had saved. A track sung in the language her ancestors once spoke, just for her. However, even within the midst of pleasure, the past knocked on occasion. It came, once more, one cold iciness morning while Maya acquired a smartphone call she never predicted. Adam, his voice turned into older, heavier. "Hesitant. Maya," he stated, after which paused like he wasn't sure it changed into K to say her call. She hadn't heard from him for the reason that night she left. No birthday messages, no emails, now not even a glance on social media. She hadn't searched him either. A few wounds had been better left unopened. "I'm not calling to make an apology," he said, and Maya nearly hung up. But something, a few small ghost of interest, saved her retaining the smartphone. "I just concept you ought to understand," he persevered. "Dad handed away ultimate night time. Coronary heart assault." Maya closed her eyes. The phrases didn't hit the manner she anticipated. She didn't sense grief, not within the manner she had imagined she might if at the present time ever got here. It was more like listening to about a stranger's passing, a peculiar ache in a far-off part of herself, like a forgotten memory she couldn't quite region. "I didn't name for sympathy." Adam stated quickly, I wager I idea you had the proper to know." She didn't thank him, didn't offer condolences. She simply said, "Okay." Earlier than he hung up, he brought, "Mother's not doing splendid. I think she misses you more than she lets on." That made her pause. She had spent years wishing Alina would attain out, that she'd wake up one morning to a voicemail announcing she was sorry, that she was incorrect, that she loved Maya anyway. But that name in no way got here. Now, abruptly, Adam became retaining that thread in his hand, dangling it in the front of her. "She may want to have known as," Maya stated quietly, "I recognize." They ended the call without promises. Maya didn't rush to present a bag, didn't power through the nighttime to her youth home. However, she didn't throw her cell phone across the room both. That was boom. Later that nighttime, Harper determined her sitting at the porch within the cold, staring out into the light fog settling over the garden. Maya told her everything. Harper listened without interruption, just lightly located a hand on hers. "You don't should forgive them," she stated softly. "You don't owe them that," Maya nodded. "But I suppose I need to allow Cross," and that, she realized, was different. Forgiveness had always appeared like a present she couldn't have the funds for to present. However, letting Cross, that felt like something she ought to do for herself. Some days later, Maya wrote a letter to Alina, no longer to her searching for reconciliation, no longer to reopen wounds. Just to mention what had never been stated: "You gave me a life I didn't ask for. I don't hate you. However, I gain it. Let your alternatives define me anymore. I've located my own family. I've found peace. I am hoping sooner or later you locate yours too." She mailed it without a go-back cope with. The very last piece of her past commenced to settle then. Like dirt after a long storm, the years kept transferring forward. Maya and Harper sold a cottage near the coast, in which the waves should sing to them each morning. Maya's art started to advantage quiet acclaim, not in galleries, but in the houses of people who needed it. Her artwork told stories of healing, of solitude, of searching and finding. One in every of her favored pieces, a portrait of a female standing inside the rain, fingers open wide, hung in their living room. Whilst asked what it meant, Maya continually smiled and stated, "Freedom." Leila grew older, but in no way dimmed. She told testimonies until the very stop, stories of affection and heartbreak, of a daughter misplaced and found. While she passed, she left Maya a box packed with journals and photographs and a letter: "Thank you for finding your way again to me. You had been by no means lost, Maya." Just waiting to come domestic. In that second, Maya wept like she hadn't in years, no longer out of pain, however out of gratitude. For the journey, for the detours, for every moment that had led her right here. She visited her antique fatherland as soon as lengthy after Alina too had exceeded. She didn't visit the residence. She just drove by, using it slowly, heart constant. It no longer held strength over her. It turned into a place that had formed her, but no longer a place she belonged to anymore. Back home, she sat on her porch beside Harper, looking the sky flip orange over the ocean. "I used to suppose I needed to earn love," Maya stated quietly, "that I needed to be perfect to deserve it." Harper leaned in and kissed her temple. "And now I recognize love just is. Just like the tide, like breath." She paused. "I'm no longer the woman they disowned anymore. I'm the lady I selected to grow to be." The waves whispered their agreement, and that became the cease of the story, no longer with remorse, but with reclamation. Maya became no longer described by those who forged her apart. She was defined by using the life she constructed, the affection she obtained, and the reality she discovered. And at last, she became home. Thank you for staying with Maya's adventure.